The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation, every second weighed down by palpable tension. Karoline Leavitt stood firm before the bench, her expression unreadably calm, like the eye of a storm. Across from her, Judge William Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, a smug smile tugging at his lips. He gripped the gavel like a warrior clutching his sword, convinced victory was already his. "Miss Leavitt," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "They say justice is blind. But even she can tell when someone's in over their head." A ripple of quiet laughter swept through the courtroom. Hawthorne leaned in, his grin widening. "Today, you're going to learn a hard truth." Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her stillness was deliberate air. Every movement measured, every breath calculated. Then came the sound that would send shockwaves, the sharp crack of the gavel. "Karoline Leavitt, you are hereby sentenced to jail time for contempt of court." A collective gasp filled the room. Reporters scrambled for their cameras, pens flying across notepads. Satisfaction painted the judge's face. But he couldn't see what was quietly brewing just a few feet away. JD Vance straightened, his gaze flicking between the judge and Karoline. Slowly, he exhaled, then spoke, his voice deliberate, his tone unwavering. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Time stood still. For a fraction of a second, the judge's smug grin faltered. In that silence, JD Vance began to shift. The ground beneath them. But this was only the beginning. The judge's gavel had barely fallen before the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Reporters whispered. The bailiff approached Karoline, but she didn't move. Not a step. Instead, she turned and locked eyes with JD. In that glance, an entire conversation passed, silent, unspoken, understood only by those who truly grasped the stakes. JD's face revealed something fleeting, cryptic to most, but crystal clear to Karoline, a warning, a broken bar, and a promise. Judge Hawthorne tapped his fingers on the armrest, savoring his perceived triumph. A man who built his career on absolute control, he believed he had crushed a rising star. But he hadn't accounted for JD Vance. With one sentence, the judge had set the stage for his own undoing. JD's posture was relaxed, but beneath it was something far more dangerous than anger. Cold, surgical precision. This wasn't panic. This was strategy. Years of high-stakes legal warfare had forged JD into a tactician. And today, his opponent wasn't a lawyer. It was a judge who had forgotten a fundamental truth. The law doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to those who know how to wield it. JD stood with quiet control, commanding the room. The judge, still convinced of his superiority, watched with thinly veiled amusement. "Mr. Vance," Hawthorne drawled. Mockery laced through his voice. "Do you have something to add?" Silence followed. Earthy and electric. Everyone held their breath. JD let it hang. Then, finally, he spoke. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but charged. "Before my client is escorted out, I'd like to enter something into the record." He reached into his briefcase. Not for a file, not for a folder. Just a single sheet of paper. That single sheet sent a shiver through the courtroom. Judge Hawthorne's grin didn't fade. But his eyes flickered. Just barely. Doubt. "And what exactly do you think that will accomplish?" He sneered. JD's smile was razor sharp, not reassuring. Or unsettling. "Oh, a broken bar, just a small legal technicality might cause a slight inconvenience." He slid the page forward. The tension thickened. Reporters leaned in. Lawyers whispered. The judge's fingers twitched. JD's demeanor shifted. Again. And suddenly, Hawthorne realized that he had lost control. The judge scoffed. "If you think waving a piece of paper will change anything in my courtroom, you're delusional." JD didn't flinch. He didn't need to. This, he said, lifting the paper with care, isn't just any document. It's a writ of habeas corpus. Filed. Under emergency jurisdiction. The room froze. Lawyers turned to each other, stunned. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. Even the bailiff's expression shifted. Judge Hawthorne's smirk faded at the first visible crack. "That doesn't change my ruling," he said quickly. J.D.'s gaze locked onto his. Calm. Icy. Precise. "Actually," J.D. said, "it does. Because 10 minutes ago, a federal circuit judge granted an emergency stay on my client's sentencing pending a full review." A wave of gasps rippled through the courtroom. "You expect me to believe that?" Hawthorne snapped. "I don't expect anything," J.D. replied. "But I suggest you read the signature at the bottom." Without waiting, J.D. walked forward and placed the writ on the bench. The judge stared at it. Then slowly a hesitant clear reached for it. His eyes scanned the signature. And everything changed. The color drained from Judge Hawthorne's face. His fingers trembled. The signature belonged to a federal appeals judge. The kind of authority that could overrule him instantly. J.D. stepped back. Hands in his pockets. Calm as ever. "Unless you'd like to risk contempt of federal court," he said lightly, "I suggest you vacate your ruling." The silence was total. Absolute. Everyone in that room knew what had just happened. Judge Hawthorne clenched his jaw. His knuckles whitened around the gavel. Then, reluctantly, he spoke. "The defendant is free to go." Gasps. Flashbulbs. Shock. J.D. gave Karoline a small nod. She returned it. That was all they needed. Then, without another word, J.D. turned and walked out of the courtroom, mission complete. Judge Hawthorne sat frozen. In disbelief. He had been outplayed. And J.D. Vance had delivered a message that echoed loud and clear. Power is not immunity, and arrogance has consequences. As J.D. disappeared through the doors, the atmosphere shifted. Some watched with awe. Others with resentment. But one thing was certain. No one would forget what happened in that courtroom. And if you thought this story was over a broken bar, you'd be wrong. Stay locked in. Hit that like and subscribe because the next chapter is coming fast.